Okay, so some similarities and differences between Frederick Douglass and Martin R. Delaney's approaches to freedom and equality. I would say that their key differences is that Douglass had a bigger focus on integration for equality, and Delaney had a nationalist approach. So, what that means is that Douglas more so focused on equality within the nation and racial justice within society, as in, like, blacks could achieve equality with whites within society, while Delaney more so argued for things like racial separatism, self-determination, and even like immigration back to Africa as a potential solution, which was a big move. Delaney even claims that there's no equality of persons where there is not an equality of attainments. And this is basically focusing on like the system of America and the fact that it's impossible to achieve true equality within the system that is just built on inequality. So blacks as a community would be able to create like a stronger community by, through black power, black nationalism coming together to strengthen their cultural values and through things like education, is the way in which equality and freedom can be achieved.
Nice, nice. Okay. I was doing question two, so we can move on to question three about the National Colored Labor Convention. So for the first part of the question, I haven't really studied the history. I know like the basics. Like most people know like the civil rights movement. They're fighting for civil and social rights, but also like labor rights, economic justice for Black people. So throughout the reading, it's talking about Black labor leaders meeting in DC to form the National Colored Labor Union. And then there was another company they formed called the Chesapeake Marine Railway and Dry Dock Company. And the railway company was not financially successful ultimately, but it still illustrates like the fortitude and economic strength that Black workers were pushing for. So, in terms of what it taught me, I did not know at the time that Black people were discriminated against from joining unions. I honestly, I didn't know that because unions are like quite a progressive thing for workers. I didn't realize that racism was like another contextual piece of the history. So the National Colored Labor Union, it reinforces the contextual history of the time where, yeah, labor rights were a big issue for people fighting against like bad working conditions, exploitation, etc. But Black workers being discriminated against by rejection from white labor unions kind of adds another barrier to gaining economic independence. So that's what I learned.
So I obviously also previously didn't read about this, and it really expanded my understanding of early Black political organizing. And it showed me that during the 19th century, Black Black leaders were meeting nationally to discuss serious labor rights, including economic independence, education, owning land, and long-term community advancement. And what really stood out to me was how strategic and forward-thinking their conversations were, and how they wanted to build institutions, create networks, and think beyond just the immediate survival and more long-term solutions. They understood that economic power and education were the key to freedom. And I thought I already had a basic understanding of early Black activism. But this reading made me realize how coordinated, intentional, and visionary their efforts really were.
And then tackling the fourth question, with T. Thomas Fortune, the question was, are labor and capital still in conflict? And then is the conflict the same, I guess, like nowadays? I would argue that they are still very much in conflict, but the conflict isn't to the same extent. I would say that labor and capital are still very much in conflict, but even more so now. He
discusses like the growing disparity between the wealthy and then the proletariat that he because he was like very influenced by Marx. He highlights issues like low wages and poor work conditions and worker exploitation. And then throughout the text, which was rather short to be honest, he points to strikes, labor unrest, and then the organization of the proletariat, specifically in what he mentions as like the most damning of this conflict being the revolution, the French Revolution, and how that inspired the Haitian Revolution with Toussaint Louverture, and then the American Revolution without that emphasized no taxation without representation. He specifically points out how unnatural it is to be capitalist, since he specifically mentions the social and material differences which obtain in the relations of mankind are the creations of man, not of God. God never made such a spook as a king or a duke. He never made such an economic monstrosity as a millionaire. And he never gave John Jones the right to own 1,000 or 100,000 acres of land. And he specifically likes to point how unnatural it is to be such a capitalist and hoard all this like millionaire money. And I would say that it's even worse now. Nowadays, in modern times, given like there was no such thing as a Jeff Bezos, in like during the time that this was written. Um, Now I would say that the wealth gap has exponentially increased. And I like did like a little bit of research behind that. He ends saying that he believes that they'll balance, but I would say that they really haven't. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, in 2021, that they found in 2019, the rich have added to their net worth, while the bottom families have dipped into their negative wealth. So while the rich get richer, the poor are remaining poor and remaining poorer. So I would say, just to answer the question overall, that labor and capital are still in conflict, and it is still being entrenched behind these centuries of long conservatism um, that like so specifically like critiques. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think what you just said about like the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, I think it parallels really well to like this week's theme of like I think the argument of like integration versus like separate Black nationalism in a way. I feel like a quote from Delaney, our elevation must be the result of self-efforts and work of our own hands, really highlights like this week's main themes, which from what I've concluded from all of you guys' talking is power in numbers for the Black community is where most of the strength is going to come from, like nationalism and pride. Strength in Black community, culture, and education is arguably the most important thing because I know Delaney talks about education extensively in the Black Nationalist Manifesto. And, you know, opposite views like Douglas's integration in a white dominated society as opposed to power through a stronger Black community. And so that's what I derived as like the main themes from this week's reading. What do you guys think?
Yeah, Kaylee, I think that was a really good answer. I definitely agree with labor and um, how did they word it? How was the way that she worded it? Labor and capital?
And
Yeah.
in conflict, yeah.
Yeah, still in conflict. Like if you've taken sociology, you know, like conflict theory, the capitalist class and the proletariat, it's like a never-ending, like one is exploiting and then the other gets exploited. And that was present in like slavery, and it's obviously still present. Like Malcolm X has a quote where he says like capitalism cannot exist without racism. They're like intertwined and they benefit from each other. So I think that was a great answer. That was a great answer. And that reading kind of aligns more with Delaney's point of view rather than Douglas's, I guess. Douglas is quite like
Yeah.
a reformist, whereas Delaney is more like revolutionary, like politically and economically. So,
Which is really interesting to see played out in the
mhm,
time period, like to watch the history unfold, to see a lot more white support for Douglas's movement as opposed to the more radical change
yeah.
of Black nationalism. And the
Mhm.
producer and consumer thing, I think in Delaney's reading, he talks about this directly too. In the society, he describes it as the white society being the producers. And if the Black community integrates, all they can be like left to do is perpetually consume what the white produces, which leaves them in a perpetual place of like under the white authority, if that makes any sense. So I think those things are parallel pretty well.
Yeah, and I wanted to add on to something you said previously. You said something that's strength in numbers, and I think that really goes together with the with what I read about the National Colored Labor Convention, how they would meet together and form long-term networks and get to know each other and go through points together, and really building a bigger community of Black individuals to help themselves advance in society.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a big focus on like African unity and Black consciousness, as it states like in the little discussion introduction. Um, that's all I have to say about that. But that topic does relate really well to my research question, if you guys wouldn't mind hearing.
Yeah.
All right, it's kind of in a work in progress right now, but I have how did Pan-Africanist and Black nationalist ideas of shared cultural pride and strength in opposition with negative perceptions of Black culture and identity among African Americans due to deeply ingrained negative stereotypes shape the political strategies, rhetoric, and ideological distinctions of the 1960s Black Power and nationalist movements? It's a mouthful. Probably need to make that more concise, but that's kind of just like idea splurge that I have written down right now.
Interesting.
Is pretty on par with this week's like reading theme too, which I thought was interesting.
Mhm.
And doing this week's readings actually helped me focus my topic a lot more too. So, what do you guys have so far?
So mine's a little bit shorter. I have how did the language of equality and the Declaration of Independence shape African American political activism in the 19th century? That was kind of more on par with what we did last week, but I found it really interesting and I wanted to just expand on it.
Yeah, I like that idea. So you're gonna be focusing a lot more on like the language of certain texts.
Yeah,
That's really cool. I like that.
thank you.
Interesting.
For me, I like um mine can definitely be a little bit more specific, I feel, but overall, I don't think it has like any ties to any of this. But my question is, what are the generational effects of harsher school punishments on Black youth in secondary education? Just because I grew up in like a really underserved community and I went to a largely Black and brown and Hispanic like populated high school, and I saw like a lot of injustices in my high school, and I think that's what really prompted me um I guess to tackle this. And like upon like research I realized like there's quite a bit to like, I guess, help me hone in that question a little bit. Where I guess like my Hispanic friends received like less harsh punishments than the Black kids at my school. Whereas like my Hispanic friends would have gotten a slap on the wrist for skipping class, and maybe like a phone call home and like a warning. My Black friends would get immediate like outdoor suspension, like upon like, yeah, it was a little crazy. And I wanted to form my research question based off of like the things that I witnessed, and then I guess like what research has been done to like figure that out. So, yeah.
Yeah, I really like how that relates to like something that you experienced too. That's probably gonna make the research process like a lot more engaging. I found for like one of my past classes, focusing on a research question that I've like kind of been directly involved in makes the process a lot better. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. And it also has a lot of modern applications too, just in general. It seems like it's a widespread cultural phenomenon in the US right now,
Yeah, exactly.
according to your like early research. So that's really cool.
Interesting. All right, mine, I'm hoping mine isn't too specific. It's How has the 13th Amendment's exception clause enabled the economic exploitation of incarcerated African Americans from Reconstruction era to the current prison industrial complex? I have like personal interests in like the prison industrial complex, like prison abolition, classism, racism. So I figured I'd just like hone in on that and write about it. If you know Angela Davis, she's like a professor of sociology or something. Um, she wrote a book called Are Prisons Obsolete? And it kind of goes into like the history of like post Civil War up until now. Kind of, it's extremely eye-opening um, in terms of like racism and how like the oppression of Black people is like exacerbated by our prison system. And yeah, just like economic exploitation. I guess that relates kind of to this week's reading as well. But that's my question. I hope it's not too
Yeah.
specific. I don't know.
That sounds really interesting. I feel like I'm gonna really enjoy peer reviews for this semester. You guys' topics are like really cool.
Yeah.
I also like yours in particular because it relates a lot to what's going on like currently in the
Mhm.
US politically and everything like that with ICE and unjust imprisonments and
Yeah.
the entire argument around the incarceration system and everything like that. So you have a lot of really good modern applications for your question as well. I think that's really cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys have great questions.
Okay, I'm excited for this. Well, I guess that's all. We answered everything, yeah?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to answer question number 2, which asks, do you find it plausible that Henry McNeil Turner is Black, a Christian, and a nationalist? And using Turner as a guide, what does it mean to be all of those things at once? So as I was reading the reading, one of the quotes that really stuck out to me that can explain all of these things about Turner in one is, you may expel us, gentlemen, by your votes today. But while you do it, remember that there is a just God in heaven whose all-seeing eyes beholds alike the acts of the oppressor and the oppressed, and who, despite the machinations of the wicked, never fails to vindicate the cause of justice and the sanctity of his own handiwork. Quoted by Mirabel and Mullings in 2009. Yes, it is believable that Henry McNeil Turner could be Black, Christian, and a nationalist at the same time, because for him, all of those identities worked together. They were not in conflict. Instead, each shaped how he understood justice and freedom. As a Black man during the Reconstruction, Turner faced racism directly. When he was expelled from the Georgia legislature, it showed how white leaders tried to deny Black political power during that time. His Black identity was not personal, it was political, and it shaped his fight for equality. He didn't grow up Christian, I don't think, but as I was reading, he built his own church during the Reconstruction time, which goes into a factor of why he's so Christianity heavy in like his life, because he went from being, I think it was a minister, to being a pastor, to having to build his own church during that time that he was kicked out of the office. So to be Christian meant believing in a more order higher than white political power. Turner's appeal to a just God in heaven reframes the expulsion that white lawmakers could remove him from office. Although they cannot escape divine judgment one day, Christianity for Turner, it was more of a theological claim that God sides with justice and with the oppressed, which is not far off for him. I don't know why anyone would think he would have other ideals when he was very Christian based to begin with before he got into office. So to be a nationalist meant insisting that Black people had the power to their own future, destiny, and control over their own political identity. Turner supported immigration to Africa and the Black self-governance because he believed that true dignity required autonomy. His nationalism was not a rejection of his faith, though. It was an extension of it. He would believe that I feel that he believed that if God created Black people with purpose and worth, that they deserved control over their own political powers and social futures, which I believe I'm siding with him. Turner's ideals connect to Frederick Douglass and Martin R. Delaney. To piggyback off of the first question, Turner used Christian language to challenge America's injustice. Both men believed faith should push people to act for freedom. I know Frederick Douglass always quoted praying with your legs, which means that he actually required action, not just words. Like Delaney, Turner believed that Black people might need independence and strong political power to secure real equality, which at that time, yes. So to answer the question, using Turner as a guide, being Black, Christian, and nationalist at once means refusing fragments of one's identity instead of separating each into one and being one person. And all these three, he made it a collective thing, and it all intertwined into one, and it came into one consists of him believing that God sides with justice. Black people should have their own political futures, and being a nationalist means that he's going to advocate for Black people to have their own views, ideas. And it means grounding political struggle and lived racial experience, justifying it through moral and theological conviction, and pursuing it